Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Deeper Podcast. I'm Austin Slater. That's Dan Guinness. It is so good to be with you again. We do apologize for the skipped week. We had some schedule mismatches, but we are back. And if you're really excited to talk about what we talked about on Sunday 2 weeks ago, you're in luck because we're going to do that. And I get to test Dan's memory.
Yeah.
Because it's been a whole 2 weeks. So now we get to see what he remembers.
Yeah. Well, and it's fitting because I should be tested because it's really my fault last week that we missed our recording. I kind of had my scheduling mix up there. So, yeah, we'll do our best to recap both weeks. A little doubleheader here in my
doubleheader
baseball lingo. So
I love it. And as always, just wanted to remind all of you who are watching and listening, if you ever have any questions from any of these sermons, if you would like to know historical context or linguistic questions, or just ask, Dan or I what we think about something tangentially related, we would love to hear those. Feel free to shoot them to me in an email, aslater@friendshipcrc.org. Always love having listener questions. With that out of the way, Dan, what did we talk about for the last 2 Sundays?
Yes. So something different too. We've been worshiping outdoors these last couple weeks, and Lord willing, we'll again this Sunday. We've tried to do that just about every summer for the last 6 or so years. So yeah, a little bit of a different setting, but it's also been nice to get a little different venue. I think everybody gets hit a little bit different by the word. And so we haven't changed our series though, even though we went outside. We're still doing the series with some of the numbers of scripture and thinking about what they mean. And so 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago now, we were in the book of Joshua and thinking about the number 12 because God's people are crossing into the promised land finally after many years in the wilderness. And as they do, God miraculously opens the Jordan River so that they can do that, cross on dry ground, and then commands the people to make a memorial of 12 stones, one for each tribe, to remember what the Lord has done for them there. And so that was the number, of course, the 12, connecting with the 12 tribes. But we talked a lot about, why do we need to remember? And why do we need some physical things like that sometimes to help us, these signs? God gives them clearly, and there's others too. So we talked about that and just the completeness of the 12, all God's people making it across there. And then this past week, a little bit of a different piece. Now I'm trying to remember this, switching up my gears here because I'm also looking ahead to next week. So you might have to prompt me here a little bit with my thinking. But this past week, now help me out, Austin. That's right.
This past week was Genesis.
Yeah, okay, that's right. The number 6. So
yes,
I'm thinking 7 because that's where I'm going this week. So apologize. There's my memory. But yes, we're in the book of Genesis chapter 1 and thinking of the number 6 because we as human beings were made on the 6th day of creation. And that number connects with us as humanity. Also, it's not quite 7, so it's a little incomplete. So we talked about the uniqueness with which we were made as human beings, and that's certainly clear in the creation account, but then also, there's limitations, and there is some, of course, we know the weakness even more now, but even at the beginning, before sinfulness, there was limitations. So we talked about both, and then what does that mean for the way we live our lives and how we deal with the limitations, but also uphold the unique, special qualities God's made us with and the special relationship we had with him. So, 12 and half of 12.
12 and a half. There we go. That's a good way of doing it, honestly. No, and I know there's so much interesting stuff in here. We'll start going back to the 12 and specifically on the concept of memorials, because this is something that we talk about a lot in society and how we remember things. And I think historically we've been better about even building physical memorials. One of my favorite cities to ever visit is Washington, D.C. I love Washington, D.C. because you can't walk 2 steps without hitting a memorial to something important that happened. And you're remembering this history and reliving it. And so first, just on a personal level, do you have any memorials or traditions in your family and your family life that you guys have? So one that I'll share for us is there's a cabin that my grandfather built up north in the UP. And it's one of those that, they were missionaries, so they built little bit upon little bit over the years, whenever they were back on home assignments. And there are throughout all of these rooms, either artworks or poetry or just souvenirs from their time as missionaries. And so really anytime we're up to that, though it's not an explicit memorial, to their service, to their time overseas, to their ministry. Going up there really is like walking through and being reminded, oh, when they were in Ivory Coast, they did this. When they were in Congo, they did this.
Mhm.
Is there anything like that you guys have?
Maybe not quite the same way. I mean, one thing I thought of is we have, one of these, kind of family established signs just for the four of us are in, 2011. That's kind of a way to remember, like, this is the year we got married. God brought us together and started, our particular family unit. We do have also in our home, and someone made this for us when we left the previous church I served at. It's kind of a picture of our family at the time. And then people had written all around that some just farewells and blessings as we went. And we have that and keep it. And it is kind of a reminder of that season. We served in that place for 7 years and the people there, some who are now with the Lord, right? So it's just a reminder of that. I've thought of like yearbooks too. Yeah, those are kind of markers that
we still keep all of our yearbooks, and I don't know how many of you all keep your, especially from like high school, but still tons of notes and things in that. That really, that's a really good one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even personally for me, it is interesting. You mentioned some of your family connections and missionary. Like I've kept physical objects from different things in ministry too. When I did some work in Brazil for an internship, and I had a few things from there, and then now I've been to Kenya, like just different things, or somebody gave you this at some point, and it might be a book, but it could be just an object. And so you kind of hold those, you remember that person, or maybe what God was teaching you in that time. And so I think there's different ways of doing that. My larger family, I don't think we have anything bigger like that, although you had pictures usually key and things that kind of are significant. Or we have a little John Deere tractor. The kid's great-grandfather, Liz's grandfather, was into farming, and he loved getting those kind of gifts before he passed for the grandkids, right, the great-grands. And so we have this little pedal tractor, which none of us can sit in anymore, but we still have it because it's kind of a connection with him too, and a reminder of what he did and some of our lineage. So yeah, we do have things like that, even just in our blood relations. So.
Right, which I love, and as a new parent, this is also something that comes into my mind a lot, is like, I want to make sure that I am leaving good memorials for my kids, whether or not it's, the physical history of things we've gone through, lived through, places we've been. But again, also like we were talking about on that Sunday, our spiritual history. And so then my first question for you on this then is, how do we build or choose good memorials? What makes something durable, long lasting? And it can be, even it can be something as like, for me and my son, making sure he knows these family history things. It can be for, like you were saying, like you have your family established things. How do we in our modern era? Because at least I haven't seen any like 12 piles of 12 stones like physically built.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily build monuments like that anymore. So then how can we memorialize things in our modern era?
That's interesting. And some of that might be lost in our, I grew up in a large city, suburban environment, right? So some of the smaller towns probably do this better because they have, more tight-knit community, and this happened. And so I wonder, those could be some good suggestions. I'm also thinking of churches, like even here, got that cornerstone marked, right? Or that initial with the date. And those are significant. People remember, and you come across, and like I'm a church, you usually know, go look. And you'll see established, or when this building at least was put together. So sometimes, people will do this. One way to do it in a family, like when you get some concrete poured right around your house, maybe if you have a new build or something, like you put the handprints there with the kids, and the date. And I remember one of my brother-in-laws, I remember visiting his parents' place, and there it is, like him and his siblings from now, 30 something years ago. Right. But it's kind of a cool memorial of, one, what your hand size was this. And also like, oh yeah, that we've been here all this time. And so there is still, I think you might not build, pile up stones the same way, but there's things you can do to connect with that. And sometimes maybe it is a photo or something that you just take the time. We're going to frame that. We're going to take a little special attention to have that marked out. I think it's usually significant moments. We talked about that in that sermon. Like this was not an everyday thing. Like God parted the shore and they walled up the water. And I mean, this wasn't going to happen every day. So you need to remember this big moment. Yeah. So even personally, when there's these significant moments. So maybe it is, marriage or the birth of a child or, a new home you're establishing physically or, something happened big that, as we're talking spiritually, then and changed the course. Like, what is it, that marks that? Maybe it's just some sort of document that you want to, it's worth doing that with, of course, the caution, especially as we get to the spiritual side, that, yeah, these things are signs. They're not the actual, especially it's not God himself.
Yes.
Even the ark wasn't God himself, as we talked about. So you do have to understand these are pointing us to something bigger.
So with that, we and especially on the pointing us to something bigger, we were talking about our spiritual memorials. We were talking about, these are times when God has done something really powerful. These are times when God has interceded well. And we want to make sure we remember that because these don't happen every day. And then some of the examples you gave, birth of a child, a new home, things like those are really positive things that we tend to focus on memorializing. A lot of the time, though, the reasons that God is getting so involved is because we have been going through something incredibly difficult and hard. Oftentimes because of something we have done, potentially, or just by virtue of being sinful people in a sinful world. So how do we then healthily memorialize the really hard things? Is that even good to do? Or
Yeah, that's a good question. I think yes is the answer, especially if we're following Christ, right? We're in a relationship with the Lord to connect with how he's graciously and powerfully acted in our behalf and brought us through difficult things. I guess the downside of the caveat is we don't need to wallow in you're a terrible person. You're not trying to re-engage, but we talked about some of the signs God's given to us and that we largely use, like the cross. I mean, there's a picture of Jesus went there because of our sins, right? To take upon himself that justice. And so there's a reminder of his grace, right? And they're clearly going there for us, but also the reasons there.
Yeah.
And we talked about the Ark of the Covenant and what was in the Ark were all reminders of sinfulness, right? You had the 10 Commandments, which even when Moses was getting those, the people were making a golden calf, and clearly we don't follow those perfectly. You had Aaron's staff in there, which they had that whole event because there was rebellion against the leadership of Aaron and Moses. And then also the manna, which the people were complaining and grumbling. So they were all reminders of we were kind of broken and not acting, and God graciously provided and is still seeing us through. I mean, just this one with the 12 stones. They had been in the wilderness for over a generation. They had grumbled, sinned continuously, and yet the Lord still was faithful and brought them there. So it's fitting, I think, and I'm trying to think of examples, right? But yeah, sometimes we mention the birth of a child, right? And sometimes there's a difficulty with that and challenges, and right? So there might be something to remember, man, God brought this child in the world through maybe a difficult pregnancy, or and there might be some way he was a family would connect with that as a reminder of God's gracious gift, but also, this wasn't easy, right? In the midst of,
and that led us to rely on God more.
Right. Or, I mean, if you struggle with an addiction and you've seen some victory with that, right? There might be something, and certainly I know going through AA, there's some physical things they give, tokens often, when you've been, sober for a year or certain amounts of time. I think those physical things, they're a reminder of, our own brokenness, and we have to be aware of our limitations as we get into the next one. But also God's been faithful. He's been helping me. And sometimes without wallowing in it and being what a wretched person. And, I'm still letting that sin kind of dictate, but to see God's brought us through. He's been faithful. He is gracious. He is following through on his promise. And even though we're broken and dealing with these things.
Well, I like you were kind of saying this earlier, that a lot of these things, there is the positive with the negative. So with the AA tokens, again, you can't just say this is just a token that I got for whatever reason. It's a token because I was an alcoholic.
Right.
And so as we're creating these, it can be really helpful to create things that tie into the story of our struggle. One of the things that I know there's a million and one reasons why we don't do this in more Protestant traditions. One thing that I do think is kind of cool about part of the Catholic tradition, when they have their cross in the sanctuaries, they'll often still have Jesus on that cross. And we obviously know Jesus came off the cross, and like that's part of the whole thing.
Sure.
But I think it is really powerful to memorialize the suffering that he went through on our behalf.
Points to the why.
It points to the why. And obviously, again, there's reasons we don't do that, but I just think, again, that's kind of a similar example of that.
Well, and you're right. People have, I think, personally do this a lot. And there's lots of stories where someone has some sort of physical keepsake memorial that reminds them of, like, I was going in this direction, and this is a reminder, whatever it might be. It could be with addiction, could be relationally or something else. This reminds me not to go on that path, right? Change the direction of things. I don't want to go back. There's, piece of rope or whatever it is reminds me of that. That freedom, that victory he gave. And, that moment, led us from the Jordan. You could still see it. And I need to be reminded of that. So, and that's what we talked about in the passage too. Why do we have these things? Why does God give them? Because we forget very easily. And it's so easy for us to slip back into poor habits and just forgetting about the Lord, and just that, spiritually we can start to think, oh yeah, we're just going on fine. And I think especially for a lot of us, and maybe a lot of you listening, who have grown up in the faith, we can take it for granted. Like, oh yes, of course, we always go to church. This has always been this way, and it's easy to kind of go through the motions. And we need those reminders of, this is what He's done for us. This is why.
Yeah, no. Oh, I love that. And that actually kind of ties into what was going to be my second question for this week's. But I'll ask it first, because we were, we have, especially if we're growing up in church contexts, we're obviously very familiar with the fact that we are imperfect beings. But, someone like myself, I'm obviously on the younger side, but I have been living in a faith-baked environment for 28 years. And so I have had a lot of practice with learning to love the Lord, learning to serve Him, and learning that, I am not God. We are limited.
Right.
But I've gotten a lot of good practice also at like learning how to overcome through, trusting God, through prayer. Like this is something that I've had a lot of practice doing, and a lot of us may have, a lot of us may not have. But we were talking about our limitations on this last Sunday, and how, we are not complete as God is complete. We are 6 and not yet 7. And we were talking about how it's important to be aware of our limitations so that we don't get broken by them. And one of the things that immediately came to mind in that, I've spent some time trying to learn how to be effective when I go to the gym. And so one of the things that I did was, that was important was watching videos of people do poorly and do things incorrectly.
Actually, on their limitations.
Well, because one of the things, if you've ever done any physical lifting like that, well, that like you have limits, and it is really dangerous to push beyond your physical human limits. Like I won't get into much detail, but I saw someone doing bicep curls and they did not do it right, and their bicep snapped.
Right.
And that's just, that image stuck with me of like, as a human, I have my limitations. No matter how long I might have practiced, no matter how long I've been in the gym, I still have human limitations, and especially spiritual limitations.
Yeah.
The trick with spiritual limitations, though, Dan, is that I can't physically see or feel them.
Right.
Like if I'm lifting something, I can be, wow, this is much heavier.
Too much weight.
This is too much weight. But when it comes to our spiritual limitations, it gets so hard, even and sometimes especially if we have been doing this our whole lives, to know when we're pushing up against that limit. So how do we know? How can we know if we're pushing up against our spiritual limitations?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's probably not just one answer as far as like, oh, if this is going on, it. Just thinking a lot about this, and even just in a normal sense, like there's warning signs, right? You mentioned that, with like lifting, right? Your body usually is going to sense something like, oh, that's a lot of strain, or you start to feel like not just like soreness, but pain or something like that. I'm thinking of it with my vehicle. Actually was just recently making an appointment because I'm like, there's some warning signs. There's a noise that's not normal, right? Or it's more than, and it's like, something's going on there, right? And if you don't pay attention to it, it gets worse. And then something pretty destructive happens, right? Same with your muscles. And so I do believe there are things we can watch out for, warning signs. And I think it could be maybe a little different for someone who's in the faith and has been for a while than someone who's maybe outside. But what came to mind for me is the phrase when the Apostle Paul, Saul at the time, has his conversion. And he relays that later on in the book of Acts and is talking about it. And the voice of the Lord speaking to him, it says, it's hard for you to kick against the goads. And just this, like, yeah, you're fighting upstream. And you're trying to do this yourself. You're trying to go against the way the Lord made you to live. You're trying to say, I can handle it my own, and I can take care of this journey. And you're not having the interaction, the communication, the reliance on the Lord you're meant to have. And there he was specifically fighting against what God was doing. And so I think there's warning signs, like we're going to be running up against it. And especially for us, who maybe are part of the tradition you mentioned, I've grown up with this. I kind of know these rhythms. But when we're kind of disconnecting, maybe I'm not communicating as much with the Lord. I'm not reading scripture as much. I'm not having prayer time, just not having that time with him. Maybe I'm not going to worship as much. Or I kind of have this sense like I kind of got these things. I think I'm doing just fine. There's going to be warning signs, I believe, that will come up of kind of that kicking against the goads, or there's this kind of this larger humming that's going on in my life that's like, oh, whether it be I'm treating people a little bit differently, and maybe a little more anger that's coming up. What's going on there? And I think we notice those things, but sometimes we're just like, just having a bad day. But then it keeps coming up. I'm acting in ways that aren't normal. I'm upset about these things. I have a lack of peace. This is just didn't used to bother me before. Now it's bothering me a lot. I find myself more at odds with the Lord and thinking like, what's he doing here? I don't like what you're saying here in your word, and I'm going to do it my own way. There's more resistance, and there's warning signs, I think, that will come up with that kind of lack of peace, or just that I'm going in this direction, but there keeps being this resistance. I keep maybe it's time to pay attention. The Lord's trying to say, damn, you're trying to do this yourself. You're trying to take on too much weight. You're trying to be your own savior, or make your own plans. Or we said in the message, you're trying to live your way, not my way. Pay attention. This is destructive for you. You're going to blow a bot set here. You're going to, so I think for us, we need to pay attention. There are, I believe, warning signs. Yeah, it's maybe not as tangible as, this knee is really,
but they're the end oftentimes, and we say this all the time, but people around you will notice. And so this is also where you kind of need to rely often on the close people around you. You mentioned anger. There was a time where I was getting angry all the time. And Danica called me out on it. She's like, hey, this is something that I've noticed. And in the moment I was like, I'm not angry. Like, this is all justified. Like, obviously, I'm fine. And then it was like, oh, no, clearly I am getting a lot more angry than I used to. And though it might feel natural and justified, it was enough that she had noticed and needed to comment. And so, again, I think that's another part of this if we're trying to figure out where we're pushing up against these spiritual limits, the people who know us can often tell better than we can.
And that's a great point, because that could be, something for us if we're seeing that in a close one, because that's hard sometimes to say something. You're like, oh man, they're going to be mad at me, or like, but if you're a close person, God's put you alongside that person, a marriage or friendship, sibling, whatever. Hard to do, but it might be what they need to hear that is kind of put them back in. Like, I need to make a little repair here. Yeah, I need to re-engage, who I am before the Lord. And so that's a really good point too, because you might have noticed something, but then, her saying that's like, okay, yeah, boy, I don't want to be
right. I don't want to be known for this.
Yeah, that's not who I am. And that's right. It's not. I mean, just having those moments, we've all said it, where like, man, I was just really, I don't know what happened there. That wasn't me. Can't believe I did that. And even connecting back with those memorials we talked about, I am sure that all of us listening, you're watching, you have times where you look back even years ago and you remember things. Boy, I acted out of character there. I said that to that person. I did that. There's a reason for that, right? We know we're getting off track there, and what happened there. And sometimes it's because maybe I was disconnected. And so, yeah, we want to not get to those moments where it becomes overly destructive and it causes more damage. So, yeah, being aware of those warning signs. And sometimes it is that regular maintenance check-in too, where it's, all right, no, it's how have I done this? I haven't really prayed. Yeah, that's maybe not good. I need to get in that rhythm. And even as staff yesterday, we were talking about the Lectio practice and just a good way to get in scripture and finding what rhythm works for us to be reminded of the Lord and our place before him. And yeah, sometimes it's to rebuild that confidence in him of, God does have a purpose for me. He does have a value upon me, because we go through the valleys and sometimes we forget that too. And that's not who we are either. So, yeah.
No. Thank you for that. I do have one question then that's a little bit more on the maybe academic side. I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, yeah.
But we were talking about in the scripture, how we were given the earth to subdue, to fill the earth and subdue it, and to rule over it. And you mentioned that the word subdue there is much more like a shepherd tending to their flock, which is not what I'm like. That is not at all what I hear subdue, and it's like, no, I'm
Sure.
holding it down. This is
Right.
mine. I have authority over this. So I guess how do we know that it is much more like a shepherd tending a flock rather than a ruler with an iron fist? And then also, like, what does it mean to subdue like a shepherd would subdue?
It's a great question. Yeah, that word there, I wish, the word's there, and there is that sense of authority clearly be given and rule be given. But in English, it certainly has those like putting down connotations, of course. And, I think Genesis 1, you have to remember, this is even before sin comes into the world and that brokenness. So very clearly, that's the original intent. And there's not this sense of, but creation is out of control. You need to subdue it in that fashion. So I think initially, clearly, the meaning comes from the way God then creates and rules. And even there with us, how he creates and he kind of works with us. And he gives permission to us, as we talk about in Genesis 2, and calls us and gives us permission and responsibility, and also limitation, as we just talked about. And so there is a right place, and God's clearly the one in charge. And yet the way he rules with us, even when we are broken, as we were just talking about, he works with us. He's calling us back. There is this kind of, and Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. Now, I think there is this connection, right? This is where it goes through. So I think overall, that's the piece.
Yeah.
Like, we're meant to tend creation.
Well, I know you really appreciate the reminder that this is before sin.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that is such an important context
Right.
for us to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that why we use that shepherd versus the tyrant, not self-serving, but serving, or, serving the creation, serving those around us. Because that to me is still the overall principle. Now, in a broken world, things are a little bit different, right? As far as, now sometimes creation is groaning and out of control a little bit. It needs to be subdued in a way like, all right, we need to have this so it is a blessing rather than, causing damage or destruction. You think of Jesus and that picture even in Psalm 2 of, ruling with the iron scepter, and still a shepherd image. That scepter is still the shepherd's crook, but it still needs to be like, I need to bring my creation back to where it belongs. And so there is some of that, his power to do that, but it's still that blessing. It's still to bring it back where it goes to it. He still comes initially as the shepherd to say, please come back and be drawn in. And eventually he's going to make all that new. So there is the balance in this world of you're a creation guy too. You think of that, but even think of like controlled burns, which I always say it's like an oxymoron. Okay. Controlled fires. But why do we do that? Well, because creation can get a little bit out of hand, and things aren't maybe the most healthy. If the forest, say, is just growing out of control, it's more dangerous. Yeah. And so you need to do that. And I think that's a good way for us, like, as far as creation, and there's some subduing it there. Like, okay, we need to bring this. This is healthier. Whereas I don't know, and I guess I don't know. In the new creation to come, are we still going to be having controlled burns? Part of me thinks
They'll be
no.
much more controlled.
At any rate, that's where maybe in a broken world, where some of that we have to use a little more force, maybe in a way. But the whole goal of it is, again, blessing of creation for the good of things, so that even the forest can be what it's meant to be, not just so that we can have what we want. A negative example might be, we just spent some time in the Smokies, right? A beautiful area there. We went and actually did some zip lining. We were out there at the mountains. It was fun for the family, but they had these little plaques along the way at each station, and just about the history there. And it got back into the logging industry, going back now 150 plus years ago in the 1800s. And they had the plaque that said that at that time, when it was at its peak, there was only 20% of the forest there, which was really hard to even fathom. I mean, just looking out, it's like only 1/5 of this was there. That's how much was being taken. And you could see that, there's some good in taking logging. I think in the word subdue is like, use what I put around you for the flourishing of humanity, but also for the blessing of creation. But you could see that getting out of control there. Like, oh, we can make a lot of money doing this. And we could do whatever we want. And then you're damaging creation. It's not even good for humanity. Yeah. And so we've dealt with that. We've talked about the rainforest over the years and things. So there is that piece, I think, in a world like, okay, how do we help creation? It's a broken world. We're broken. You could easily see our limitations where we can go overboard and just thinking of ourselves and just kind of being like, this is whatever we want to do is this is good, kind of thing. And like, no, we have to follow God's example and see the way he leads us and tends us. And of course, we're reflecting his image and supposed to. So how do we go about that? So that's where, there is clearly authority, responsibility. It's one of our unique pieces given to us as human beings, but we're meant to then use that rule and authority, that responsibility in godly ways. And that might even be as a parent, as a pastor in church, as a staff person in our church, as an older sibling.
Yes.
And that kind of how, these responsibilities, how do I go about them? So,
no, I really appreciate that clarification. That's, again, just very helpful to keep in mind as we look at some of these, because when when we translate things, it doesn't always translate the way it was written.
Or it comes across.
Differently. Yeah. So I appreciate that. What are we talking about this next week? Now we're pushing you all three of them.
Well, I know that's what I was just looking at some of this material for this coming week, and I could not get back to the 6th, so I needed your help. So I appreciate that. But this week we're thinking about the number 7 actually, which is one that comes up many times in Scripture in many different ways, including creation, 7 days. This one we're going to kind of really get on the 7 train and think about 7 times 7 and the year of Jubilee. So there's this celebration God calls for. Count on 7 times 7 years, 49 years. And the 50th year, celebrate this year of release and Jubilee. And we're going to talk about the origin of that, but really specifically when Jesus comes in Luke 4. And he pronounces what he's doing, and he connects with this passage from Isaiah, which really talks about the year of release. And that's going to be coming maybe in a spiritual sense as well as a physical one. And Jesus standing up and saying, that's right now with my ministry. Like, whoa, that's a huge deal, of course, and elicits some strong response there from his hometown.
Really?
When they say, we know you. But just that, what does that mean? Now is the time of that year, that 7 times 7 year, and what that means for receiving the message of Christ, maybe thinking a little bit why we might resist that, the way we live, and then what we're looking forward to as well. So just that, I love the 7 times 7. We got our church picnic too, so it calls for celebration. Like, this is the moment we're living in. That time has come. That's what we're looking forward to.
That'll be fun. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your time, for reaching all the way back 2 weeks.
2 weeks was easier, apparently. I remember that last probably.
Thanks to all of you for being a part of this, and we will see you next time. Go in peace.